welcome our first speaker this morning, who's going to do an introductory talk. So there's no Q&A at the end of this. It's a bit like yesterday with Nuno. We're going to hear from Debbie Hepplewhite. And then at the end of that presentation, we'll go into our second presentation straight away, so at about 9:30. It's our pleasure to welcome Debbie. Debbie is an absolute pioneer in the field of international reading. And I have had the pleasure to get to know Debbie really over the last 18 months. And Debbie has opened up a whole new world for me in terms of literacy, reading instruction, effective reading instruction, and how it's done worldwide. And her support, her guidance, her advice, her resources have been invaluable to me and are invaluable to many people around the world. And we really do hope that in Debbie's short talk today, and I know Debbie could talk for a whole day, whole week, but in Debbie's short talk today, we really hope that you will get a flavour for what's out there, what's out there for you to engage with, and what's out there in terms of what's already been done. A lot of work has been done for many, many years, and it's there, and it's there to engage with and there to help you and support you. So Debbie, it's an absolute honour and pleasure to welcome you. Thank you for being with us. How are you?
Oh, very nervous.
Don't be.
Right. Very nervous, and technology's not been working for me this morning, so I was up pretty early and panicking. Can I say that I'm the one who's honoured to be speaking to you all? It is to you all, actually, not really with, because we don't have the two-way exchange. And although I've done lots of Zoom, I still find it very difficult because, you know, we're not in a room together, and so the pressure's on. Now, Jeff's given me a brilliant introduction there because it's talking about the complexities of teaching the English language. Now, I haven't got a bone in my body that thinks that people should teach English. So if English is your second or additional language, I don't think that you should have to teach it. But many countries around the world want to teach it as an additional language. So it's one of those languages that is most commonly taught. And often the teacher has English as an additional language, him or herself, which makes it more complicated. The other complication is that the English language spelling system has an alphabetic code, and it happens to be the most complex alphabetic code in the world. Now, imagine the complexity when you may be teaching in a country where you have an alphabetic system of sorts. So we have letters in that are similar, and so there are similarities. But you could be a teacher in a country where your system of writing is completely different. It's not based on phonetics, and therefore you've got that additional complexity. And then you've got the complexity of the actual speaking itself. So it's really hugely complicated. But I woke up very, very early this morning, and often happens, you know, words and ideas pop into your head that you hadn't really planned for. And that happened to me this morning, and all these wonderful words came in, and I'm thinking, oh, yes, I can include those in my talk. So I jumped up and I got a notepad and I wrote down these one or two words, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, the words are growing. The complexities are growing. And so what I thought was going to be simple notes for my talk this morning became this absolutely spider's web of ideas. And I'm thinking, how can I get that across in a really short space of time? Now, you would think that by now, in 2021, we would have cracked how best to teach a language, any language, but let's stick to English. And in a sense we have, or some people have. And I'm involved with an organisation which is actually an informal organisation, and I don't do formal. I'm very uncomfortable with formal. I'm very comfortable with informal. And I realised the importance of an organisation was that all of the many roles and responsibilities that people have need to come together to support the teaching and the teaching training profession. When it boils down to, here we are, we're a teacher and we've got all of these children in our class, they might be English speaking, they might not be, how best to teach them and how best to support them. And in such an organisation, you don't need a hierarchy. The organisation I'm talking about is the International Foundation for Effective Reading Instruction. And in short, I refer to that as IFERI.
Debbie, would you like me to share that on my screen?
Yes, that would be fantastic. So if you just can go to the home page to start with, that would be really great. So what we need to do is we need to bring together people who are in the research community and who are very knowledgeable about research. They may have done research themselves or know about the history of research. But then we need to bring together the practitioners, the people who are the hands-on people, the practical people. Practitioners may be program authors, maybe teacher trainers, maybe teachers in the classroom, people who are actually doing the doing. But then an added complication are policy shapers, policy makers, people who are in educational and political authority over the teachers and perhaps the teacher trainers, but particularly the teachers. So in this reading debate scenario, we need policy shapers or policy makers as well. But it is so complicated that we've all heard the idea that, well, research can say what you want it to, so you can cherry pick your research. Research isn't of equal quality. So you need to be able to read the research to understand, well, what was the experimental group like and so on. So you need a certain amount of quality assurance for that. And then what we have is a phenomenon that I call pioneers. And I think Jeff might have referred to that, because it's very easy to get stuck in one's bubble, in one's clique or in one's university or in one's political organization, and to live a complicated life. And actually many of these organizations or hierarchies are very formal. And so the human condition seems to be such that we get increasingly formal, increasingly complicated. And so you have a top-heavy scenario where the poor teacher in the school is accountable to a lot of people with a lot of authority, when really that teacher is concerned about the local community and the often very young children in their care. So of all the various interest groups, there are people who are pioneers and they stick out. Now, sometimes a researcher who finds out how best to teach reading becomes so involved that they end up being a practitioner. So they create a program and carry on with a longer term approach. So the International Foundation for Effective Reading Instruction is based on pioneers. That is what they have in common. And they need to be people who are prepared in their corners or in their countries or in their organizations to go that little bit further to try to inform people so that people can make informed decisions with how they best teach children. And this is not always possible. Now, because people tend to be steeped in busy lives, to try to get those people together is quite a complex task. So what I'd like Jeff now to do, please, is to go to the top bar, go to the committee. Now, this is the founding committee. And if we scroll through the founding committee, you will find a real combination of some academics who, in this field, often they are getting elderly. I hope they don't mind me saying that, but you know, they've been in this field, if you like, for a very long time, and they often understand that they need to go above and beyond their little bubble or their little corner. You'll also start to recognize the different countries we're talking about: Australia, New Zealand, Scotland, and if Jeff keeps scrolling, you'll see people from England, Australia again, and we have representation from Canada. I'm going to talk about Sir Jim Rose in a minute in some detail, and if Jeff keeps scrolling, we then have America. We have Grace Villar from South America. And actually, it breaks my heart to say that we lost Bob Sweet fairly recently. And Bob Sweet was an incredible pioneer, not only in a large sense. So Bob Sweet entered this debate a very, very long time ago, but he reached very high levels to change policy, to get things into law in America. But he was also such an individual that there are many of us that he formed a relationship with, and he used to email and support us as individuals in this quest. And what Bob had was incredible insight. He realized that it boiled down to, how are we supporting the teachers in the classroom? What is that looking like? And can we build on one another? Now, if Jeff would so kindly go up to the top to the advisory group. So we extended the people who are supporting this organization in the advisory group. And then approaching these people, we knew that they were incredibly busy and time poor in their own countries. But again, it was important that we got people from various countries. So as you scroll down, you can see that representation from these countries. Mainly, it has to be said, in English-speaking countries, although everyone's country nowadays has people in that country with many different languages, and usually and often their mother tongue is not English. So we can have schools even in England whereby there are over 30 other languages of children in that school. And the teachers themselves may not speak that language. They're highly unlikely to cover that. And so you are talking about scenarios where children are going into a situation where we have to be able to communicate and teach the spoken language as well. Now, the debate rages on how best to teach reading instruction in the most complex alphabetic code in the world. And one of the ways to do it is to understand what research is showing us. So we need to be a research-informed profession, but that's a very muddy picture. So this morning, when all of these things kept popping into my head about what to talk about, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, nothing is clear. And it doesn't march forwards. And so you have a situation of internationalism because, for example, in England's context, and I say England, not the whole of the United Kingdom, in England, at the turn of the century, we had a big rollout of a national literacy strategy. And that national literacy strategy included guidance for teachers, which made no sense to me as a teacher in the classroom. It was focused on what we call the multi-cueing reading strategies, which amount to asking children to read books that they can't read yet. So we have to tell them to look at the picture and guess, think about the context. What does it mean? Read on, go back. What do you think that word would be? Well, look at the first letters. What do you think that word would be? It's another guess. So it was guess, guess, and guess. And that made no sense to me. So as a teacher that did not have a background in research, I hadn't been trained in phonics, for example, but from my experience, this suggestion that that's how we teach reading just simply did not make sense. Now, phonics was mentioned, but not as a priority, not as a main thing. And I challenged that, and through challenging it, became associated with other people, again, in England's context, that weren't just teachers, head teachers, researchers, people doing different phonics programs, but they were all saying the same thing. You need to teach that complex alphabetic code very systematically. and that does not involve teaching children to word guess. And I became involved with a similar organisation to IFERI, but in England's context, and that was the Reading Reform Foundation. And we did the same thing there, people working collaboratively to question and challenge the government at the time, the orthodoxy at the time, because that didn't make sense. And we were collaborative, using different programs, but getting these great results. And one thing led to another. And eventually that became a parliamentary inquiry led by a politician called Nick Gibb, who is currently the Minister for Standards in England. And that led to Sir Jim Rose being invited by the government at that time to conduct an independent inquiry into the teaching of reading. And there we have Sir Jim Rose there. He is the most wonderful gentleman, he really is. And like Bob Sweet, he is someone with no snobbery, no sense of hierarchy. He's a natural gentleman, a natural leader, and a diplomat. And he conducted an inquiry across the UK, and he also had some history of looking at schools in America. And he did a very, very important thing. He and his team of inspectors looked not only at the research findings at that time, and actually some important research was already coming out of America. So we were looking to America. And in the 1980s and 1990s, some very important conclusions were being found that a more whole approach to literacy and all of that multi-cueing, which amounted to word guessing, was not the best way forward for children, even though many children were becoming literate under that. And we need to look at the most effective way. But what Sir Jim Rose did was look at the practice under his nose, what they saw with their own two eyes. Now, Sir Jim Rose's report is really world renowned. And if you don't know about his report, you need to know about it because it's incredibly readable. And we need to value, therefore, research findings and what the practitioners are doing with various programs. And one thing he flagged up in his report was this notion of the simple view of reading. Now, perhaps all of you listening today absolutely understand about the simple view of reading, because that had already become a model of understanding reading in the full sense as being two main processes. And Goff and Tumneb, way back in 1986, had come up with this simple model. And what I love about it more than anything else is the diagram itself, which is showing on a cross shape with two different axes that actually we need to have the technical knowledge and skills as teachers to teach children the technicalities of lifting the printed words off the page. But the children need the spoken language with which to understand the words that have been lifted. Now, in a situation, an international situation, that means we're talking about teachers having to teach the spoken English language. So language is very, very important, but be very knowledgeable and expertise about that complex English alphabetic code and the phonics skills and sub-skills required not just to teach reading, but to teach spelling and writing as well. And that's a whole other talk for another day, because actually what we do is, in my opinion, we overemphasize reading and don't pay due respect to spelling. Because if you think reading is difficult in the English language, you should try spelling. It's a lifelong task. So I often call upon Sir Jim Rose's report. And one of the things he said was that regardless of children's difficulties and differences, so this is going into the realms of dyslexia, right? Regardless of that, that'd be great if you went there, actually. Thank you, Jeff. It is exactly the same alphabetic code, which means the spelling system, the writing system, that needs to be taught. And the complications, you know, when I was thinking about my buzzwords this morning that came, were so complicated, because in the world of people who are fighting for their children, who have got who are identified as dyslexic or having dyslexic tendencies. I like to refer to dyslexic tendencies or a propensity to muddlement. Depending on your perspective, you think about it as, how can we support these children? What accommodations do they need? And we're maybe not looking enough at the difference between prevention and intervention. And often the difficulties are the teaching difficulties, looking to the teaching. But now we need to get into the realms again about the big boys, the research organizations, the establishment. Because very often the very programs and universities and their established way are not the ways that we are thinking how best we can teach the children. So then we get back into the policy and the policy shapers. But we also still sort of dip our toe into that prejudice. Now, I'm in a very unusual position because I'm absolutely a practitioner. You know, I come from the classroom, I come from teacher training, I come from program writing, I come from a position of supporting individuals from around the world every day when they contact me and they're looking for a little bit of guidance, and I'm making suggestions. But I've stepped my toe into what happens when we try to hold to account those in authority for the methods and materials that they promote. And across the world, even in our English-speaking contexts, it is such a mess and it is not consistent at all. But I can attest to the difficulty of holding those in authority to account. It is almost impossible. And if you do not have, by chance, a politician like Nick Gibb, or an individual like Sir Jim Rose, or like Bob Sweet, who are in positions of authority and influence, it is almost impossible to hold those in educational authority to account. And this is where the difficulty lies, because we go round and round in circles. But sometimes even the most amazing pioneering academics and researchers aren't giving sufficient credit to the program authors and the bodies of work that are written to support teachers. So it broke my heart at one point when I heard an amazing pioneering researcher make a rather flippant comment that teachers don't need programs. And I'm talking about phonics programs. Well, that can be a reality if you have got a knowledgeable, capable teacher. That knowledgeable, capable teacher, day in and day out, might give the provision for the children the most amazing, sensible, well-paced phonics program, along within that rich language and literature environment, and do a marvelous job. But schools are not like that, because we cannot rely on that talented teacher. That talented teacher might leave the school and leave a gaping hole in that school. And why should teachers be expected to come up with that level of expertise and that body of work which is supportive, which actually has taken a specialist like me, or even a researcher specialist, a long time to be able to understand and to come up with? And so we do not want people going round and round inventing the wheel. So surely we've reached a point where, when it comes to research, we can draw certain conclusions. And Sir Jim Rose really nailed it, that we need to teach systematic phonics of this complex alphabetic code to any child, so they have that competency to lift the words off the page. How best can we do that? But we still have the research community. Some people come up with their own ideas and they work really hard to undermine the progress that has been made to date. But now I'm just glancing at the clock because I can see that I'm running out of time. I want to just talk as well about common sense coming from the classroom and the practitioner. So give me just 2 more minutes to finish this. Just recently on Twitter, because one of the things I do is Twitter, And obviously, you have a lot of people who are really urging people to turn into a research-informed community in the teaching profession. But we need a research-informed and practice-informed community. So someone was asking something, and they'd copied me into a tweet for my comment, and I made a comment based on what I referred to as common sense. Oh my goodness, did I get lambasted by someone? Oh, how can you talk about common sense? You know, we're talking about people of the caliber who refer to research. We need research for this, blah, de, blah, de, blah, de, blah. And I thought about that, and I'm thinking, well, no, from my position, that is not entirely true, because we still have to look at research, and it's not equal quality. We need to look at the body of research to look at the commonalities of where we need to go with this. And sometimes sheer sense and what we do in the classroom comes into it. So I thought, right, sense is not common. We can't refer to common sense, because we have so many people with different perspectives, different understanding, different biases, different prejudices. Under different authorities, we still have teachers talking about the fear factor. We still have inspectors who are not knowledgeable enough. So who takes the higher position, a specialist in this field or a general in schools inspector? These are muddy waters, and we can undermine one another's work. So I am going to speak up for sense and practitioners, and I'm going to say that we're not there yet. We still need to come together in communities where we have mutual respect for the researcher, for the older person, for the new fresh person, for objectivity, for sense, and come together. Now, people come to me often and they feel inhibited because they don't feel they have the academic background to argue the research. Now, the International Foundation for Effective Reading Instruction, if you care to visit the forum there, the forum has lots of other forums in it. And we have one dedicated to research and recommended reading, one dedicated to looking at reading instruction around the world, news and events, a general forum, success stories, and so on. And what really counts is this, you know, education blogs and websites of interest. People are all having their own websites, their own blogs, their universities' blogs. It's a minefield. And over and again, I'm old enough now that where student teachers have come to me and they need to write a dissertation, or you might call it a thesis, to get their qualification, they're always starting from the beginning, and they're asking me the questions that I was addressing 20 years ago, and Bob Sweet and his colleagues were addressing 20 years before that. This reading debate is not new. So we actually really need some kind of coming together and openness where researchers respect practitioners, where we can look across programs, what do they have in common? We can have impoverished phonics done well with rigor that still does well. We can have excellent programs not done with rigor that don't get the results they could. So, you know, it's still muddy, but we should be at the position where we can conclude general findings about the research on reading instruction. And we can now examine programs that are likely to support teachers better, that inform parents, that everyone can share that common understanding. And then we need to know what commitment to that looks like in the classroom. And at the moment, the waters are still very, very muddy. So I'm looking forward to the next event that Jeff and his colleagues put together, so we can bring these ideas together and bring the researchers, the practitioners, the policy shapers together. And it stops being an impossibility to hold those people in education and political authority whose policies are not up to date, but it's nigh on impossible to persuade them or to show that that is the case. And maybe that's going to take a whole new other generation. So thank you very much for bearing with me today.
Thank you so much, Debbie. You made us realize how complex this whole issue is. And I can see that people are writing comments and questions, so we'll refer them to your website, and we hope to stay in touch with you. And thank you so much again for taking the time to participate.
Thank you very much, everyone.
And Debbie, if you want to come in later, if you've got some time, we'll be thanking you in the plenary session at the end of the day in a little bit more detail. But we have to move on because